The 1980s were a decade of neon lights, blockbuster legends, and cinematic disasters. But when once mocked, booed, or ignored by audiences, becomes a masterpiece decades later. Some were branded career killers, others were pulled from theaters in shame. Yet today, critics hail them as visionary. These are the 12 80s bombs that audiences hated, yet history has chosen to love. Number 12. Heaven's Gate, 1980. When Michael Cimino's Heaven's Gate arrived, it wasn't just a flop. It was a financial apocalypse. United Artists gambled on a Western epic meant to follow Cimino's Oscar-winning The Deer Hunter. Instead, they got a nearly 4-hour behemoth. Critics at the time called it bloated, pretentious, even unwatchable. The studio panicked, slashing its runtime and yanking it from theaters after disastrous box office numbers. The story itself was a sweeping frontier drama about European immigrants clashing with wealthy cattle barons in Wyoming. Cimino staged sprawling battle scenes with hundreds of extras, using natural light and authentic period sets. But the attention to detail spiraled into excess, rumors spread of ballooning budgets, endless takes, and a director out of control. United Artists lost nearly $40 million, and the collapse of this film even ended the studio's independence. Behind the scenes, the chaos was legendary. Horses allegedly injured during elaborate sequences sparked outrage. Crew members whispered of Cimino's obsession with perfection, demanding entire sets be rebuilt at the last moment. By the end, critics sharpened their knives, declaring Heaven's Gate a disaster that proved Hollywood directors had too much power. Yet, time softened the judgment. In the 1990s and 2000s, a full restoration revealed Cimino's original vision, haunting, painterly, and strangely prophetic about class divides. Today, the very excess once mocked is praised as ambition. What was once a box office disaster now screens in film schools and retrospectives worldwide, its reputation reborn as a misunderstood masterpiece. Sometimes, failure is only the first draft of greatness. Number 11. The Thing, 1982. John Carpenter's The Thing wasn't always the cult classic you know today. When it premiered, it was branded disgusting and nihilistic. Audiences walked out. Critics trashed it as too gory, too bleak, and, most damning of all, soulless compared to Steven Spielberg's family-friendly E.T. released just weeks earlier. Universal Studios had banked on Carpenter delivering a hit. Instead, they got one of the decade's most infamous bombs. The premise was simple, yet horrifying. At an Antarctic research station, a shape-shifting alien takes over scientists one by one, mimicking their bodies perfectly. The paranoia was suffocating. Who's human? Who's not? But the practical effects crafted by Rob Bottin were so grotesque. Mutating dogs, exploding torsos, spider-legged heads, that critics recoiled. Some papers declared it pornography of violence. Parents' groups demanded warnings. Universal, embarrassed, cut promotion short. Behind the scenes, it was no less tense. Bottin, only 22 years old, worked himself to exhaustion designing nightmares that had never been seen on screen before. Kurt Russell fought bitter Antarctic conditions in snowbound Colorado. Carpenter, already a cult horror director, felt blindsided by the venomous reviews. In his own words, the criticism hurt deeply. He wouldn't helm another studio blockbuster for years. But decades later, everything changed. With VHS rentals and midnight screenings, fans discovered the brilliance hidden beneath the blood. Today, The Thing is hailed as one of the greatest horror films ever made, a masterclass in atmosphere, suspense, and trust eroded under pressure. What once looked like grotesque excess now feels like a mirror to human fear itself, and its chilling ambiguity. The frozen question of who survived still lingers like ice in the veins. Number 9. The King of Comedy, 1982. When Martin Scorsese teamed up with Robert De Niro for The King of Comedy, many expected another hit in the vein of Taxi Driver or Raging Bull. What they got instead was a cringe-inducing satire about fame, obsession, and humiliation. Audiences didn't know what to make of it. Critics shrugged, box office receipts flatlined, and Scorsese, already reeling from New York, sank further into Hollywood's bad graces. The story followed Rupert Pupkin, a wannabe comedian so desperate for fame he kidnaps his idol, played by Jerry Lewis, and demands a spot on live television. The tone was uncomfortable, the laughs bitter, and the characters painfully awkward. Audiences in the early 80s weren't ready for such a sharp indictment of celebrity culture. Some even walked out, embarrassed by the film's unnerving realism. Behind the scenes, the shoot itself was strained. Jerry Lewis clashed with Scorsese's unconventional style, often improvising scenes to the director's frustration. De Niro immersed himself in the role, even stalking real comedians to study their mannerisms, creating a performance that critics dismissed as over the top. For years, the movie languished as one of Scorsese's lesser works, a misstep in an otherwise legendary career. But time worked its magic. By the 2000s, the King of Comedy had been reappraised as a chillingly accurate portrait of celebrity obsession. In the age of reality TV, viral fame, and social media influencers, Pupkin's delusions felt eerily prophetic. Today, the film is often cited as one of Scorsese's most daring works, influencing everything from The Office's cringe comedy to Todd Phillips's Joker. Once ridiculed, now revered, the King of Comedy became the ultimate joke on us. Number 8. Manhunter, 1986. Before The Silence of the Lambs made Hannibal Lecter a household name, Michael Mann brought the character to the screen in Manhunter. At the time, it bombed spectacularly. Critics called it sterile, audiences ignored it, and Orion Pictures quietly buried it under the weight of bigger releases. For years, it was considered an expensive misfire, a stylish thriller with no teeth. The story followed Will Graham, a retired FBI profiler lured back to hunt a serial killer named the Tooth Fairy. Brian Cox, not Anthony Hopkins, played Hannibal Lecter, though here spelled Lector. Mann crafted a neon-soaked psychological crime drama filled with moody synths and painterly visuals. But in the mid-80s, audiences wanted big explosions and clear heroes. Mann's methodical, artful approach baffled viewers, and box office numbers plummeted. Behind the scenes, Mann's perfectionism dragged production schedules long past their limits. William Peterson immersed himself so deeply into the role of Graham that he reportedly needed therapy after filming. Test screenings were lukewarm, leaving Orion executives with little faith. They marketed it poorly, even changing the title from Red Dragon to Manhunter, fearing audiences would think it was a kung fu movie. Yet, as the decades passed, its brilliance emerged. The neon aesthetics, once mocked, became hallmarks of Mann's signature style, influencing shows like Miami Vice and countless modern thrillers. Today, critics hail Manhunter as a visionary work that paved the way for the prestige crime dramas of the 2000s. And Brian Cox's restrained Hannibal is now praised as the most chillingly realistic version ever captured on film. From forgotten failure to cult cornerstone, Manhunter proved sometimes the first step gets lost in the shadows. Number 7. Big Trouble in Little China, 1986. When John Carpenter released Big Trouble in Little China, audiences didn't know what to make of it. Was it an action film? A comedy? A parody? The result was a confused box office disaster. 20th Century Fox marketed it as a straight-laced adventure, but Carpenter had delivered a bizarre, genre-bending kung fu fantasy that nobody knew how to sell. Audiences stayed away and critics called it a mess. The story followed Jack Burton, a swaggering truck driver played by Kurt Russell, who bumbles his way into a supernatural underworld beneath San Francisco's Chinatown. Ancient sorcerers, kung fu battles, and lightning-wielding villains filled the screen. But rather than being the typical macho hero, Russell's Burton was a parody of one, clueless, loud, and constantly saved by others. In the Reagan-era action boom, this satire flew right over people's heads. Behind the scenes, Carpenter battled studio interference. Fox executives forced rewrites and demanded that Burton appear more heroic, undercutting Carpenter's vision of a satirical anti-hero. The marketing department was equally confused, promoting it as another Indiana Jones-style romp rather than the offbeat comedy fantasy it truly was. Unsurprisingly, the movie tanked, and Carpenter, frustrated by Hollywood politics, retreated from big studio filmmaking. But years later, Big Trouble in Little China was rediscovered on home video. Audiences finally understood its tongue-in-cheek brilliance and wild mix of martial arts, fantasy, and campy humor. Today, it's hailed as a cult classic, inspiring everything from video games like Mortal Kombat to modern superhero films that embrace absurd spectacle. What was once chaos in Chinatown has become cinematic gold, a reminder that sometimes a film needs time for its magic to be revealed. Number 6. After Hours, 1985. Martin Scorsese's After Hours was a film critics didn't know how to classify and audiences flatly rejected. Released quietly by Warner Brothers, it told the surreal story of one man's nightmarish journey through New York's Soho district. Neither a drama, nor a comedy, nor a thriller. It was all three. And none. Viewers found it too strange. At the box office, it was dead on arrival. The plot followed Paul Hackett, played by Griffin Dunne, as a mild-mannered office worker who descends into a bizarre series of late-night encounters. From eccentric artists to violent mobs, every turn of the night grew more absurd. But instead of offering answers, Scorsese leaned into absurdity. Audiences left bewildered, asking, "What did I just watch?" Behind the scenes, the film was equally tumultuous. Scorsese, still reeling from the financial disaster of the King of Comedy, took on After Hours partly as a way to rebuild his career. The budget was tiny compared to his earlier epics, forcing him to work quickly and cheaply. Warner Brothers, however, had no clue how to market a surrealist odyssey. Ads pitched it like a wacky comedy, which only misled audiences further. Critics at the time dismissed it as confusing, but decades later, After Hours has been praised as one of Scorsese's boldest experiments. Its surreal energy and Kafkaesque humor influenced indie filmmakers like the Coen brothers and Charlie Kaufman. Today, it stands as a midnight movie gem, a portrait of urban paranoia and alienation, wrapped in pitch-black comedy. What once felt like nonsense now feels like prophecy, showing how quickly a single night can spiral into madness. Number 5. Scarface, 1983. It's hard to believe now, but when Brian De Palma's Scarface hit theaters, critics despised it. They called it vulgar, violent, and excessive. The Washington Post dismissed it as grandiose trash. Roger Ebert gave it 2 stars. Audiences, too, were shocked by its brutality and crude language. The film limped through its initial release, tainted by controversy, and mocked as little more than an exercise in cinematic excess. The story chronicled the rise and fall of Tony Montana, a Cuban immigrant who claws his way to the top of Miami's underworld. With Al Pacino delivering one of the most intense performances of his career, the film was drenched in neon blood and ambition. But its unflinching depiction of greed and violence made many recoil. Rumors swirled of protests and censorship attempts. The MPAA nearly slapped it with an X rating before reluctantly allowing an R after cuts. Behind the scenes, tension ran high. Pacino burned his hand during filming a gunfight sequence, halting production. De Palma fought studio executives over the film's length and content, refusing to sanitize his vision. Even the cast clashed with extras and critics who branded the film irresponsible. For years, Scarface was dismissed as tasteless pulp, a black mark on Pacino's resume. And then came the 90s. Rediscovered through VHS, cable reruns, and hip-hop culture, Scarface was reborn. Its excess became its strength. Its quotable lines, neon style, and cautionary tale resonated with a new generation. Today, it's revered as a classic of American cinema, studied for its themes of ambition, corruption, and the cost of the American dream. What was once reviled as trash became a monument to excess and obsession, proving that legacies are often written in hindsight. Number 4. Brazil, 1985. Terry Gilliam's Brazil was never meant to be easy viewing. A surreal dystopia of bureaucracy, paranoia, and dreamlike imagery, it was initially seen as a financial catastrophe. Universal Studios tried to bury it, fearing audiences wouldn't understand a dark satire wrapped in absurd comedy. Critics were divided, some calling it brilliant, others labeling it incoherent. At the box office, it collapsed. The story centered on Sam Lowry, a low-level government worker trapped in a nightmarish bureaucracy. Haunted by dreams of flight and beauty, he stumbles into a world of terrorism, surveillance, and absurd authoritarian rules. Gilliam designed a world that looked both futuristic and antiquated, machines leaking steam, paperwork stacked to the ceiling, and screens showing propaganda. It was Orwell by way of Monty Python. Audiences in the mid-80s, raised on optimism and blockbuster fun, weren't ready. Behind the scenes, the production became legendary for its battles. Universal executives wanted a shorter, happier cut, while Gilliam refused to compromise. He even ran full-page ads in Variety, challenging the studio head by name. Screenings of Gilliam's cut were held secretly for critics in Los Angeles, sparking headlines about censorship. Eventually, Gilliam's version won awards, but the theatrical release was mangled and flopped. Over time, however, Brazil became a cult masterpiece. Today, it's celebrated as one of the greatest dystopian films ever made, its satire on bureaucracy and surveillance more relevant than ever. Once derided as too weird, it now feels prophetic, its imagery echoing in everything from The Matrix to Black Mirror. What was once a bomb has become a vision of our future, a future Gilliam saw all too clearly. Number 3. Blue Velvet, 1986. When David Lynch's Blue Velvet premiered, the reaction was scandalous. Some critics hailed it as genius, others called it depraved. Audiences, unsure how to process its mix of suburban wholesomeness and nightmarish violence, stayed away. Box office numbers were weak, and Lynch, already notorious after the disaster of Dune, seemed on the verge of becoming Hollywood's strangest failure. The story began innocently. Jeffrey Beaumont, a college student, discovers a severed ear in a field. His curiosity leads him into a world of hidden darkness beneath small-town America, nightclubs, sadistic criminals, and one of cinema's most terrifying villains, Frank Booth, played with ferocious intensity by Dennis Hopper. Lynch combined soap opera sweetness with horrifying depravity, creating a tone unlike anything seen before. Audiences recoiled. Behind the scenes, production was equally fraught. Isabella Rossellini was humiliated by critics who dismissed her brave performance as career suicide. Hopper, long considered washed up, terrified cast and crew with his wild energy. Test audiences reacted with disgust, and some theaters refused to show the film. Lynch himself admitted he thought his career might not recover, and yet critics began to reconsider. By the early 90s, Blue Velvet was seen as a turning point in American cinema, a bold statement about the darkness beneath the American dream. It earned an Academy Award nomination for Lynch and paved the way for his later masterpiece, Twin Peaks. Today, it's considered one of the most important films of the 80s. What was once dismissed as grotesque is now hailed as visionary, a reminder that beauty and horror often share the same shadows. Number 2. Videodrome, 1983. When David Cronenberg's Videodrome arrived, it horrified audiences and baffled critics. Too strange to be a hit, too disturbing to be ignored, it tanked at the box office. Many dismissed it as disgusting nonsense, calling it a bad horror movie with delusions of grandeur. Universal executives quietly let it fade away, assuming it would never find an audience. The plot followed Max Wren, a sleazy TV executive who stumbles upon a broadcast called Videodrome, a signal that warps reality, reshaping both body and mind. What began as a media satire transformed into a grotesque body horror odyssey, filled with pulsating VHS tapes, melting flesh, and guns fused to human arms. For early 80s audiences, it was too much. They wanted Ghostbusters, not prophetic nightmares about media addiction. Behind the scenes, Cronenberg worked with cutting-edge effects artists to create surreal transformations that still unsettle today. James Woods immersed himself in paranoia, while Debbie Harry shocked audiences with a role far from her pop star image. The production was difficult, with budget constraints forcing Cronenberg to push every dollar to its limit. When released, critics largely rejected it, and audiences abandoned it almost instantly. But time has been kind. In the age of digital screens, streaming, and endless media consumption, Videodrome feels uncannily relevant. Its mantra, "Long live the new flesh," has become iconic, and critics now regard it as one of Cronenberg's most profound works. Once a bomb, it's now hailed as prophetic science fiction, showing us that television, and later the internet, would reshape reality itself. Number 1. The Shining, 1980. It may seem impossible now, but Stanley Kubrick's The Shining was not an instant classic. Upon release, it was ridiculed. Critics called it dull, overindulgent, even laughable. Stephen King, whose novel inspired it, openly hated Kubrick's adaptation, calling it a betrayal. The film received mixed reviews and even a pair of Razzie nominations. For years, it was considered a disappointment in Kubrick's career. The story, of course, is infamous. Jack Torrance takes his family to the isolated Overlook Hotel where winter storms trap them, and madness consumes them. With slow pacing, unsettling imagery, and Jack Nicholson's unhinged performance, the film unsettled audiences rather than thrilling them. Many complained it was boring or too confusing. The film made money, but the cultural verdict was disappointment. Behind the scenes, Kubrick's perfectionism turned production into torment. Shelley Duvall was pushed through endless takes, breaking down emotionally. Nicholson grew exhausted from Kubrick's demands. Rumors spread of psychic manipulation, with Kubrick intentionally isolating his cast to heighten tension. Even the set itself, a vast maze of impossible corridors, contributed to a sense of unease. At the time, however, few appreciated these choices. But as decades passed, The Shining transformed. Its imagery, the elevators of blood, the twin girls, here's Johnny, became part of horror's DNA. Critics reevaluated it as one of Kubrick's greatest achievements, a masterpiece of atmosphere and dread. Today, it is universally hailed as one of the finest horror films ever made, dissected endlessly by scholars and fans alike. What was once considered a failure is now a cathedral of horror, proving that true art sometimes takes years to reveal its brilliance. These 12 films prove that time is the ultimate critic. What was once mocked, rejected, or buried can rise again as brilliance misunderstood. So what does that say about today's so-called flops? Which forgotten films will tomorrow's audiences resurrect? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget, like, subscribe, and share for more hidden stories Hollywood tried to erase.